Well, don't say we didn't warn you. Baltimore is a mess. Homicides are at historic levels. Arrests are way down, and cops are under fire from bad guys and from people who should be supporting them. Since Trayvon Martin, we've seen a trend. These so-called community leaders only call for justice when there's a political gain to be had.
Trayvon represents a reckless disregard for our lives that we've seen too long. And we come to tell you tonight, enough is enough.
Michael Brown's blood is crying from the ground, crying for vengeance, crying for justice.
Your peace is sincerely needed as I work to deliver justice on behalf of Freddie Gray.
Disgraceful. And yesterday, 2 more senseless homicides in Baltimore. A woman and her 7-year-old son gunned down, making them the 37th and 38th homicide victims in the city this month. Rich Lowry, writing in Politico, nails it, saying, quote, "If you're a young black man shot in the head by another young black man, almost certainly no one will know your name. You're a statistic, not a cause. Just another dead black kid in some city somewhere. Politically useless to progressives and the media." Harsh criticism by Lowry, but I kind of agree with him. You agree with him?
Well, I think that what Rich is reflecting something. He's been a reporter and the editor of National Review for a long time, so they've been covering this for years. And he also is, I think, quite an expert when it comes to urban development and urban issues in cities. So when he speaks about something like this, I think it is with some experience and also some passion, because he's looking at this saying, okay, well, where are the protests on behalf of these people? There's not going to be, and we all know the reason why. So he's saying truthful words. I think that they might be hurtful to some people, right? They might hear that and think, well, we deserve more. You need to help us. And maybe they do need help. One of the things I was just thinking is, at this point, the Baltimore Police Department, this might be a time when they do want to reach to the federal government and ask for either some sort of help, whether it be more advisors or somebody, a task force or something, to come in and help them try to get a handle on things.
Julie, do you want to call out the so-called community leaders who use times like this when it's politically expedient for them to use them and make cases out of these different tragedies, whereas, as Rich points out, literally hundreds of black men are being killed on a weekly or monthly basis, and no one's talking about it.
I do, and I did it earlier in the week, and I want to reiterate that again. Look, you have people like Al Sharpton, I'm certainly not a fan of his, who was the first to protest when there's a Freddie Gray being shot. And by the way, there should have been a protest. What happened to Freddie Gray was inexcusable. But what happens every day in places like Baltimore and Chicago and parts of New York and every inner city is inexcusable as well. And I think as progressives, we have a duty to remember that we're not just here to protest against the man. We're also here to protest against the fact that there are millions of children whose lives are put in danger every single day by the circumstances in their communities. And we need to, I don't know what the answers are, quite frankly. It's certainly a longer discussion than this segment, but we need to not just invest in those communities, but we need to take a hard look at the fact that these people are in danger and address it, and not just grandstand the way Al Sharpton tends to do.
Ugly fact here is when you make fewer arrests, there tends to be more crime. And those who suffer are not writers at Salon or Slate or Media Matters. They're actually minorities in those communities. We talked about a truce between gangs during the rioting and the looting. That was a lie, and we see that now because a lot of these people are victims of gang violence. So there really never was a truce to stop the violence. However, the problem that I see, the bigger problem with this is now becoming another one of those political ping pong games where you have the activist groups on one side and you have the pro-law enforcement on the other side, and we're all using bad things to bolster our arguments. So when we look at the looters, we say see, and they see somebody shot, they go, "I told you so." There are 3 things that I think that need to be done. One, we have to acknowledge that there are past sins that have been done against blacks that have contributed to the way society has been for the past 40 to 50 years. But we also have to acknowledge after that time there has been a decline in values, there's a decline in family structure, and that has affected the community just as bad. And the third thing is admitting that the government policies that were put in place to address these sins and these ills have done nothing to make it better. In fact, they have done to make it worse. The end result is we need to stop playing politics and admit that the body of politics has always been one-sided in the cities. It's time for the left to listen to the right, to let black conservatives in and listen to them. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But it can't get any worse.
What are they so afraid of?
Yeah, yes.
Right?
Are they afraid of being wrong? You shouldn't be.
They're afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of losing the money, the momentum for their causes, because it has become very politically rich for them to be able to do this. They're able to get out there, their voice for their organizations, and they profit off of the loss of life and the destruction in communities. That's the truth.
You're right. So these community leaders or African American community leaders can make a big thing. They can get to the podiums. They can make a big push saying we need to fix this problem when it's a police officer who kills a young black man. We have a woman and a child shot last night. A woman and a child. Did anyone know that? Did any of the community leaders get up there and say this has got to stop? We have to fix this? No. Right? Unless if there's a cop shooting the woman and the child, and they were in the races were a white cop and a black woman, I guarantee we'd see every one of them today.
But you're absolutely right, and this is the part that infuriates me about my side, and I feel like more people should be saying this who are liberal as I am. Look, there is an epidemic going on in our inner cities, and we can't just show up when, as you said, there's a white cop shooting a black suspect, which, by the way, more often than not, I think there's reason for people to protest that. But you also have to show up when one African American kills another African American. You can't just let it go. You can't just say, well, we're only going to focus on the white versus black racial aspect.
That's the only narrative that they're interested in advancing and focusing on, which is a real shame, because to me, that's racist. Why doesn't it matter when you have one black shooting another black and killing? Loss of life should matter, regardless of the color of the skin, regardless of who's behind the trigger. Like, care about it and do the right thing. I think it's very morally corrupt to not do so.
That's absolutely right.
So we have the deadliest month in Baltimore's last probably 15 years or so, and one of the deadliest in their history. And a lot of people are trying to figure out why. But we've been talking about this at the table. When you point fingers at law enforcement, you would expect something like this was going to happen. The confusion created by the community leaders is dangerous and deadly. Listen to Baltimore Police Commissioner Anthony Batts expressing the concerns his officers have when engaging a suspect, even if it's just a traffic stop.
There's a lot of levels of confusion within the police organization. They've said this to me, so repeating them is if I get out of my car and I make a stop for reasonable suspicion, articulable reasonable suspicion that leaves the probable cause, but I make a mistake on it, will I be arrested for it?
I can't imagine having to be on the front lines with oil-armed bad guys and not knowing if my decisions will be supported or if I'm going to be arrested for them. That confusion is resulting in a dramatic drop in arrests, and Greg pointed that out just a minute ago. But here are the numbers in Baltimore. The grim numbers. Arrests are down year over year, Greg, 58%.
Wow.
58%. Imagine if when you did the 5 and if one of your opinions was off, you could be prosecuted or demonized or go to jail. That's how it is for cops. They're in a profession that if you do the job incorrectly or perceived incorrectly, it's over for you because there isn't any support or backup. If you make a mistake as a plumber, you fix it and everything goes on, or you get sued. But if you make a mistake as a cop, you are more infamous than Jesse James. Everything's over. Maybe you deserve it when you make that mistake, but on the whole, you don't smear an entire department, an entire profession based on isolated incidents. We don't do that with radical Islam. Why do we do that to police?
KG,
no, it's terrible. You don't do that to firemen, do you?
Yeah, well, sometimes.
I mean,
I'm reading a couple headlines from one website. Murder rate jumps 15% in New York City. Baltimore gets bloodier as arrests drop. Shootings involve children up 500%. Kids afraid to walk to school. What do we expect?
Well, this is a community under siege, and this is what happens when you demonize a nation wearing blue. And that's the problem, because they are less, they're more reluctant to get involved or to pursue or track the leads down to do this type of thing because they're worried actually about getting arrested now or getting prosecuted more than they're even worried about getting shot. That's how crazy this has become. And they've been putting it on the line for thousands and thousands and thousands of years in communities to try and make it better. And now it's like when they wake up in the morning, they're all of a sudden the bad guy. How did this happen?
How did we get here?
Well, I think we got here through a variety of a confluence of bad events, quite honestly, on both the right and the left. But I will say this, you're absolutely, Kimberly, I think you made this point. You shouldn't demonize an entire department based on the acts of a few bad people. And there are bad people who need to be prosecuted. Look, I think what happened to Eric Gardner here in New York was inexcusable. I know people might disagree with that, but those people need to have been prosecuted. They're not. You can't demonize the entire...
there was a finding on that, right?
There was, but you can't demonize an entire NYPD based on what happened to him. You can't demonize an entire Baltimore Police Department based on what happened to Freddie Gray, although those cops, I believe, based on the evidence so far, should be looked at.
I would just say just something to watch tomorrow. The former mayor of Baltimore and former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley, is going to announce that he plans to run for president. It'll be interesting to see if he includes any sort of solutions or thoughts on this fact that his city is in this much trouble.
Well, people are planning on protesting him and saying that, in fact, he had direct hands and a link to what happened and the violence and eruption of it in Baltimore and the police department because of his politics and ideology with respect to policing. So wait for that. They'll be protesting him and trying to tie him into it.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Next.